The Subcommittee on Oversight and Investigations will come to order. The subcommittee is meeting today to hear testimony on the role of public relations firms in preventing action on climate change. Under Committee Rule 4F, any oral opening statements at hearings are limited to the chair and the ranking minority member or their designees. This will allow us to hear from our witnesses sooner and help keep members to their schedules.
Mr. Bono, you may proceed. Chairman Carbajal, Ranking Member Gibson.
Therefore, I ask unanimous consent that all other members' opening statements be made part of the hearing record if they are submitted to the clerk by 5 p.m. today or the close of the hearing, whichever comes first. Hearing no objections, so ordered. I ask unanimous consent that the following members be permitted to ask questions of the witnesses at today's hearing. The member from Massachusetts, Representative Trahan. The member from New York, Representative Tonko. The member from California, Representative Khanna. The member from California, Representative Lowenthal. The member from Montana, Mr. Rosendale. The member from Louisiana, Mr. Graves. And the member from Colorado, Ms. Boebert. Without objection, the chair may also declare a recess subject to the call of the chair. As described in the notice, statements, documents, or motions must be submitted to the electronic repository at hnrcdocs@mail.house.gov. Members physically present should provide a hard copy for staff to distribute by email. Please note that members are responsible for their own microphones. As with our fully in-person meetings, members can be muted by staff only to avoid inadvertent background noise. Finally, members or witnesses experiencing technical problems should inform committee staff immediately. I will now recognize myself for 5 minutes to make an opening statement. I'm here today in Washington after spending several weeks home in Orange County, California. My community, my state, just suffered through one of the worst heat waves ever experienced. We know that climate change is real and it requires urgent action. For years, this committee and Congress have tried to pass legislation at the scale required to address the problem. Again and again, we failed. Until finally this summer, we passed the Inflation Reduction Act. This law is the biggest investment in clean energy in our nation's history. But this fight is far from over. Big Oil has shown that they will wage information warfare to stop legislation that would end our country's reliance on fossil fuels. And more often than not, when Big Oil fights, they win. Disinformation has been a major cause. Fossil fuel companies aren't creating and spreading disinformation themselves. They are buying it from public relations firms. At today's hearing, we will examine the tactics and strategies that PR firms use to persuade lawmakers and the public to trust Big Oil. The most familiar tactic is old-fashioned marketing. I'd like to play one ad as an example. On its surface, this ad is completely benign, just a company celebrating its service for a community after a natural disaster. But stop and consider what we know about climate change. Fossil fuels are causing the atmosphere to heat rapidly, increasing the intensity and frequency of hurricanes. Oil and gas companies know that they are fueling these horrific disasters. But then they have the nerve to hire PR firms to turn these tragedies into crass marketing opportunities. It's breathtaking in its shamelessness. This is the new face of climate disinformation. Fossil fuel companies used to discount the science of climate change. Now fossil fuel companies want to convince Americans that Big Oil itself is part of the solution so that we will allow it to continue their assault on our environment. The PR firms we're discussing today play a critical role in this disinformation effort. We will hear testimony from Ann Lee Foster, who ran a campaign to pass a ballot initiative to limit fracking in Colorado. She was followed and harassed. Her trainings were infiltrated. Volunteers had threatening materials sent to their homes. There were alleged bribes to sabotage the signature gathering effort. All of these despicable tactics were the work of PR professionals hired by Big Oil. We invited the PR firm PacWest to testify and help us understand their tactics during the Colorado ballot initiative. They declined. We invited Story Partners, another PR firm that was implicated in the Colorado ballot initiative. They declined. We invited Singer Associates to tell us about their fake news website that was created to improve Chevron's standing in the community after their negligence caused a massive refinery fire that sent 15,000 community members to the hospital. They declined. At this point, we might ask, what are these firms trying to hide? But thanks to documents that this committee has obtained and released, we know some of the answers. These PR firms create shell organizations that claim to represent large numbers of people in their advocacy for Big Oil's priorities, when they really just represent the companies that can afford to hire PR firms. They attack people on the opposing side personally. They set up fake online profiles to infiltrate nonprofit groups. I encourage the American people to look at this committee's report for a glimpse under the hood at these PR firms' tactics. These tactics are not universal in the public relations industry. In fact, there are already signs that individuals and entire companies are moving away from this work. I hope the PR industry will continue to shun such tactics and the firms that use them. Until then, this committee's investigation will continue. I now yield to Ranking Member Moore for his opening statement.
Thank you, Chair Porter. It must certainly be election season. It's an absolute disservice to the American people when committee hearings and time are used solely to score political points instead of working towards solutions for the problems that everyday people face. We have skyrocketing energy costs and inflation across the board, draining families' pockets, but we are here talking instead about public relations professionals doing their job and highlighting that their companies that they work for or their clients contributed to the Red Cross during an emergency. Like it's unbelievable to me to what level we can stoop during an election season to try to highlight that giving tax credits for electric vehicles that you can't even buy for 18 months from now is somehow going to save the world, when the rhetoric that we've seen from the majority be an absolute attack on American energy. In reality, this hearing is just another attempt to vilify this nation's most significant energy sector. And what's particularly concerning is that today's approach by Democrats threatens the exercise of First Amendment rights. Squashing debate simply because you don't like the opposition goes against our nation's core principles. It is costing families more and more to buy groceries, from eggs to the cost of bacon, to fill up our gas tanks and keep the lights on at home. The state of California just faced the threat of rolling blackouts and was forced to issue a statewide grid emergency. And what wasn't disinformation and what wasn't rhetoric was about 2 or 3 months before I came on and was sworn into this role for my freshman term of Congress, I sat down with an energy sector and individuals in my state, and they said, California, in a year from now, they're gonna have rolling brownouts. And he showed me articles and they showed me data that was gonna actually prove what plays out and what we're seeing right now in California. That's not disinformation. That is a crisis, an energy crisis that is self-caused because of rhetoric and in this attempt to sort of squash what the energy industry is doing to build a broad energy portfolio and do the right thing and move in the right direction. Employers throughout the economy are struggling to handle increasing operating costs and facing impossible decisions. All of these folks are impacted daily by political decisions, and they all deserve to have a voice in the energy policy debate. When we elevate the voices of hardworking Americans, it paints a stark picture from the increasing cost of daily life in our country. It's getting more expensive for everyone. One of my constituents, a dairy producer, described how the cost to operate just one piece of equipment increased fivefold, from $500 to $2,500 a day because of rising gas prices. His proposed solution is to turn on American energy. He's right. We should be developing our energy sources and all of the above approach. And I've never shied away from the importance of emissions reducing technologies, embracing nuclear, and not just relying on wind and solar, because we can't. Wind and solar just produces brownouts. And if we don't have a baseload power, we will not be able to do any type of expansion of our energy grid. Particularly the most damaging thing we've seen is with the Biden administration is they hamper our energy. And so it's taking 17 months to hold an onshore lease sale and failing to complete a single sale for offshore drilling. Sadly, my constituents' story is not unique, and voters deserve to understand the devastating impacts misguided policies can have before deciding whether or not to implement them. Ms. Amy Cook joins us today from the John Locke Foundation and can tell us how important it is to provide an outlet for Americans to share their stories and about their employment in the energy and gas industry, the industry's support for local fire stations or the Red Cross, or how affordable energy factors into business decisions. When anti-fracking measures were introduced in Colorado, voters needed to know how these policies would impact their neighbors' livelihoods and their own pocketbooks, which is all playing out. Denying such voices would have had devastating consequences. The ability to exercise political speech ensures all viewpoints are represented in policy debates. The Supreme Court goes to great lengths to protect speech, especially speech related to public issues. It is clear to me that the ongoing energy crisis and development of our domestic resources are public issues of great importance to American families. This committee should be wary of any attempt to stifle the exercise of free speech, regardless of whether or not the majority agrees with the viewpoint. The American people deserve better than a hearing intended to chill speech or salvage a botched investigation. What we should be doing instead, to begin, this committee should use its time examining how best to pursue an all of the above energy strategy. With a diverse energy portfolio, all sources of the energy play a role: wind, solar, nuclear, hydropower, oil, and natural gas. The practical implications of this approach are that we continue to harness the innovative spirit of Americans to create technologies the public retains access to affordable and reliable energy. Our nation has the ability to do this, and it's time that we capitalize on these abilities, regain independence, and lower costs for the American people. With that, I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Moore. Now I would like to turn to our witness panel. Before introducing the witnesses, I will remind them that they are encouraged to participate in the Witness Diversity Survey created by the Congressional Office of Diversity and Inclusion. Witnesses may refer to their hearing invitation materials for further information. Let me remind the witnesses that under our committee rules, they must limit their oral statements to 5 minutes, but that their entire statement will appear in the hearing record. When you begin, the timer will begin, and it will turn orange when you have 1 minute remaining. I recommend that members joining remotely pin the timer so that it remains visible. After your testimony is complete, please remember to mute yourself to avoid any inadvertent background noise. I will allow the entire panel to testify before questioning the witnesses begins. The chair now recognizes Ms. Christine Arena, founder and CEO of Generous Ventures, Inc.
Thank you. Chairman Grijalva, Chair Porter, Ranking Member Moore, and members of the committee, my name is Christine Arena. I'm a 20-year communications industry professional, an author and researcher on greenwashing. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today about the role of PR firms in preventing climate action. I come to this subject as a marketing practitioner and advocate for change inside my industry. The link between misleading communications and climate policy obstruction is well documented. This year, the IPCC identified rhetoric and misinformation and corporate advertisement and brand building strategies from vested interests as primary barriers to climate action. Much research on the communications techniques used by those vested interests to mislead the public has been published by institutions including Harvard, George Mason, the Union of Concerned Scientists, and many others. 13 lawsuits have been filed against U.S. fossil fuel companies based on consumer messaging that some of our country's top lawmakers consider to be deceptive and even unlawful. These ongoing efforts to expose the communications architecture behind climate policy obstruction are not about demonizing an industry or playing politics. They're about revealing the truth and protecting lives. My written statement illustrates a surge in pro-climate PR and ad messaging that sharply conflicts with corporate lobbying and investment strategies on climate change. It details how disinformation is becoming both more prevalent and more nuanced. Until now, the PR firms most responsible for this work have escaped scrutiny. The cloak of client confidentiality and privilege provides an effective shield, and PR executives have flatly denied wrongdoing. But new analysis, including the paper The Role of Public Relations Firms in Climate Change Politics by Brown University's Robert Brule and Carter Worthman, reveals some of the central players and key methods used to block climate action. These methods include: number one, corporate image promotion, including greenwashing or corporate advertising that produces false positive perceptions of a company or industry's environmental performance. Number two, third-party mobilization, including efforts to simulate the appearance of citizen support for a corporate position through the use of proxies or astroturf groups. And number three, delegitimization of the opposition, including more divisive efforts to monitor, surveil, discredit, distract, or intimidate individuals and groups that oppose industry interests. Although the first strategy is most common, my written statement includes recent examples of how the fossil fuel industry has used all three prongs to attack national and local policy measures, including its efforts to attack environmental regulations following the Ukraine invasion and the $31 million campaign to crush Colorado's Prop 112. Like the tobacco industry, the fossil fuel industry has always relied on public relations to advocate for its interests, but what's new is the intensity of its pursuits, the complexity of its operations, and the vast resources it deploys to bulldoze regulatory obstacles in its path. Ordinary citizens possess neither the specialized knowledge needed to detect the myriad of factual omissions and distortions included in greenwashed ads, nor the financial resources needed to make their voices heard over the industry's extensive lobbying and public relations efforts. By employing disinformation strategies and tactics, certain PR firms are hindering an informed populace from participating in a robust national climate conversation and corresponding climate action. At current levels, climate disinformation is not merely an ethical problem. It causes harm to individuals, society, and democracy, which is why accountability is so urgent. Unfettered greenwash will only result in the continued growth and spread of knowingly false claims. I'm grateful to so many of my communications industry colleagues for rallying together now to elevate standards and practices, and to the social scientists who have given us the applicable research and frameworks needed to do so. I humbly ask this committee to address these issues with similar resolve. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The chair now recognizes Dr. Melissa Aronchik, Associate Professor for the School of Communications and Information at Rutgers University.
Chair Porter, Ranking Member Moore, and members of the United States House Subcommittee on Oversight and Investigations. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today about the role of public relations firms in preventing action on climate change. My name is Melissa Aronchik. I am an associate professor at Rutgers University and the co-author of the book, A Strategic Nature, Public Relations and the Politics of American Environmentalism, published by Oxford University Press earlier this year. The central finding of our research for this book is that the public relations industry has, for several decades, been a major actor in the strategy, planning, and execution of campaigns for the fossil fuel industry to influence what we know and how we act on environmental issues. I'd like to make 3 points today. My first point is that public relations for fossil fuel companies is about much more than messaging or marketing. PR firms often say that they are merely facilitating or amplifying their clients' ideas or information. In fact, PR is not only communicating ideas and information, but coming up with those ideas and creating that information. They also create opportunities for that information to circulate while actively downplaying. Despite the label of public relations, PR firms target multiple stakeholders behind the scenes at local, state, and federal levels, attempting to indirectly influence citizens, journalists, and policymakers. A New York Times investigation in 2020 revealed that the firm FTI Consulting was behind fake grassroots groups including Texans for Natural Gas, the Arctic Energy Center, and the Main Street Investors Coalition. These appear as local efforts to speak out on energy issues. Rather, they are groups funded by oil and gas companies, manufactured and run by PR firms to provide the illusion of support for the fossil fuel industry. My second point today is that public relations coordinates strategies and distributes risk across fossil fuel sectors. PR firms share intelligence and coordinate strategies across sectors, including petroleum, natural gas, chemicals and pesticides, and mining. They then coordinate coalitions from members of these sectors to collectively counter action on environmental problems. These strategies are not publicized, they are not transparent, and they are not regulated. PR firms often represent these coalitions in public or informal settings, such as congressional hearings, to minimize the risk to their clients' reputation. Because this coordinated infrastructure of anti-environmental action operates behind the scenes, members of the public and lawmakers have no way of knowing if the support for fossil fuel production is real or manufactured. My third and final point today is that PR has influenced public opinion and policymaking on environmental problems for over 50 years. This is one of the most striking findings in my research. Industry reports from at least the early 1970s document how PR firms conducted pro-industry campaigns to downplay public health and environmental risks. Today, some of those same PR firms working for the same industry clients are using the same strategies to distort our understanding of the impacts of climate change. Evidence for the existence of these long-term PR strategies comes from the millions of internal corporate documents publicly disclosed during litigation against the tobacco industry in the 1990s. In those documents, we clearly see how instrumental the role of PR firms has been in preventing the public and lawmakers from acting to protect the environment. We have a record of compromising behavior by specific PR firms with devastating effects on the health and welfare of the American people. But until now, the PR firms themselves have remained out of sight. Today's hearing allows us to broaden our understanding of PR firms' accountability when it comes to downplaying the threat of climate change and the role of their clients in causing it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The chair now recognizes Ms. Amy O. Cook, Chief Executive Officer for the John Locke Foundation.
Thank you. Chair Porter and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to be with you today and to provide some comments. My name is Amy Cook. I'm the CEO of the John Locke Foundation, a state-based free market think tank headquartered in Raleigh, North Carolina. Prior to joining Locke, I held various positions, including directing energy and environmental policy at a sister think tank in Colorado. I have a journalism degree from the University of Missouri-Columbia and a master's degree in American history from the University of Northern Colorado. Love for the First Amendment drew me to journalism. Fear of losing it drew me to public policy. I agree with Jimmy Lai, a newspaper publisher currently imprisoned by the Chinese government for advocating for democracy. He said, "More information is freedom." Americans, including those in the energy and environmental policy space, are rightfully troubled by the growing threat that their speech will be shut down by those who sit in politically powerful positions. My expertise is energy policy, and what I've found in over a decade of energy policy research is that all debates distill down to trade-offs. It's the responsibility of public policy organizations, such as mine, to tell the truth about those trade-offs, putting a face on those trade-offs so that people, including media influencers, legislators, voters, and the general public, have all the information they need to make informed public policy decisions. I've been on the ground working with those who have concerns and stories to tell regarding these trade-offs. They have a right to tell their story, and the public has a right to hear them, but they're often shut out or marginalized by legacy media, big tech, and government. And as an example, let's Let's just take the regulatory space at the Colorado Public Utilities Commission. Insiders have stakeholder meetings that include only themselves, not ratepayers. They enter into a settlement that forces ratepayers to pay more, greatly impacting their families and businesses. And that's why I got involved in a utilities carbon reduction plan at the PUC. A small group of businesses felt that their voice wasn't being heard by the very commission that is supposed to represent them. The barriers to entry in a regulatory proceeding are quite high. A challenging filing system, lack of affordable counsel and witnesses, and for the privilege of petitioning your government, it can cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to do so in a meaningful way. Another example is a ballot measure I worked on. There were decent, hardworking Coloradans who wanted voters to know what a de facto ban on hydraulic fracturing would do to their livelihoods, their families, their businesses, and communities. We provided an outlet for people like Raul, a welder, and a young female firefighter just to tell their stories. And they explained what the trade-off of a 2,500-foot setback would look like for them. And in a recent energy policy debate in North Carolina, we didn't argue about the policy of zero carbon. Instead, we provided expert analysis for the most efficient and reliable way to get there. Our report supplied the foundational building blocks for what ultimately became the final version of a bipartisan bill titled Energy Solutions for North Carolina. And at a time when we are putting increasing demands on our grid with electric vehicle mandates and new building codes, we need look no further than California and Texas to see that those trade-offs are not always wise. Trading reliability and quality power for non-dispatchable sources is detrimental to the grid and, more importantly, to ratepayers. American voters deserve access to the facts so they can decide for themselves, and our First Amendment ensures that they can. And while we are here having policies or hearings to police debate of energy policy, real problems need to be solved. Gas prices are still far too high. Ratepayers are forced to pay for an unreliable and inferior product due to bad policy decisions from the past, which is really what we should be discussing. So what should we be doing? Well, we should be expanding our energy infrastructure, encouraging domestic energy production, rewarding reliability and resiliency. And for a path to zero emissions, follow North Carolina's lead on HB 951. And most importantly, creating an atmosphere that respects the First Amendment and fosters civil debate. In closing, there's really good news about energy. We don't have to choose between a clean environment and quality of life. Thanks to Americans' innovative and entrepreneurial spirit, we've demonstrated we can develop our resources wisely, provide clean, safe power, and be energy dominant, free from dependence on hostile regimes that may threaten our national security. I trust Americans to put good policy ahead of partisan ideology. Thank you so much.
The chair now recognizes Ann Lee Foster, former Director of Communications and Community Engagement for Colorado Rising.
Chair Porter, Ranking Member Moore, and members of the committee. My name is Ann Lee Foster, and I was a ballot initiative proponent of Prop 112. This was a role I never expected to find myself in. Before moving to Colorado, I was working for a university art museum in Virginia. Although I was working a wonderful job, I was living in my hometown and wanted to make a big change, so I moved. I was looking forward to the clear blue skies, but when I arrived, that was not the reality. The Boulder, Denver area has an F air quality rating according to the American Lung Association, largely due to fracking. I learned of the many studies demonstrating the negative health impacts of living near fracking and heard countless stories of children suffering from nosebleeds, asthma, and coughing episodes. I learned of a ballot initiative to limit fracking and volunteered for the campaign organized by concerned parents, school teachers, and impacted citizens. I was harassed starting the first week of signature gathering when men carrying signs targeted me, yelling at potential signers and standing between the individual and myself. This was statewide and persisted throughout the 4 months we gathered signatures. There are many accounts of particularly women being followed around by multiple protesters for extended periods. Many folks reported being intimidated and scared. A document was leaked to our campaign from an employee of Anadarko, a fracking company, instructing employees to text the location of our signature gatherers if they saw them. Colorado Public Radio tested the numbers, and protesters showed up within 10 to 15 minutes each time. We hired a professional signature gathering firm that said they had dealt with opposition tactics and with PacWest. The firm quickly started billing us at much higher rates than agreed to and producing significantly fewer signatures. The reason cited was harassment from protesters. Several weeks into signature gathering, we received a call from office staff who said the office was closing and the principal of the firm was removing signed petitions. The firm told us we would have to pay them another $40,000 to get the signatures back. We got them back when we went public with the incident. We contracted with 2 other firms after this who both quit early. One of the firms told volunteers he had taken payment to stop working with us. Despite these challenges, we qualified for the ballot. 2 weeks before the election, we were sued for defamation by the president of the first firm. The damages were based mostly on the allegation they had lost a contract with PacWest. We had recordings of all the conversations proving the firm's president took signatures against our will and the attempts to coerce us. The suit was withdrawn. I personally suffered from what I feel is stalking or harassment. I noticed a suspicious man at one of my signature gathering trainings. When turning in the signatures of the Secretary of State's office, I noticed said individual seemingly waiting for us. I told him I recognized him. I later received a text from an unknown number congratulating me on our success, identifying himself as the person I recognized at the Secretary of State's office, and saying he worked for a neutral third party. He later texted and asked me to coffee or ice cream. Later, at the Colorado State Capitol, a strange man began to follow me. I ducked down hallways and changed floors, but I couldn't shake him. He appeared at a press conference that we hosted and recorded it on his phone. I also saw him at a county commissioner's hearing. He never stated who he was or why he was attending. I also saw him at a local coffee shop I frequented. I started to encounter symptoms of adrenal fatigue, including hair loss, unexplained weight gain, and panic attacks. I saw several health professionals, including a psychologist and therapist. Despite all that we endured, the strength and persistence of Coloradans volunteering to protect their families and communities from this destructive industry was deeply inspiring and something I will never forget. In the end, this isn't about my story or even Prop 112. It's about what we are all going to endure at the hands of these destructive industries. I leave you with this quote from Nathaniel Rich's book, Losing Earth. Everything is changing about the natural world, and everything must change about the way we conduct our lives. It is easy to complain that the problem is too vast and each of us is too small. But there's one thing that each of us can do ourselves in our homes at our own pace. Something easier than taking out the recycling or turning down the thermostat, and something more valuable. We can call the threats to our future what they are. We can call the villains villains, the heroes heroes, the victims victims, and ourselves complicit. We can realize that all this talk about the fate of the earth has nothing to do with the planet's tolerance for higher temperatures and everything to do with our species' tolerance for self-delusion. And we can understand that when we speak about things like fuel efficiency standards or gasoline taxes or methane flarings or setbacks, we are speaking about nothing less than all we love and all that we are. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that valuable testimony. Reminding members that Committee Rule 3D imposes a 5-minute limit on questions, the chair will now recognize members for any questions they may wish to ask the witnesses. I'd like to start by recognizing myself for 5 minutes. I'm going to start by directing my questions to Ms. Arena. Ms. Arena, you are a 20-year communications industry professional specializing in sustainability and social impact campaigns. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and roughly how many campaigns have you worked on over these past 20 years?
I've worked on roughly over 100 campaigns, and I still do this work.
Based on your experience, do you know what the standard practices are in the public relations industry?
I certainly do.
According to your written testimony, you wrote, quote, "There is nothing standard or ethical about the practices of the PR firms we are discussing today. What makes these practices different from the standard work PR firms perform for clients?"
third-party mobilization tactic of hiring fake protesters to disrupt an ongoing Colorado Rising event. You know, hiring fake protesters is unethical in multiple ways. First, they're fake protesters, right? There's the simulation of community support or opposition that isn't really necessarily real. Secondly, it is not disclosed who is paying for and funding those paid protesters. And thirdly, those paid protesters that I wrote about were actually engaging in what I believe are harassment behaviors, that is, stalking Colorado Rising members as they were trying to make their voices heard. I do not believe that there is a single trade association in my industry that would consider the hiring of fake protesters to be an ethical marketing practice, and I certainly don't consider that standard.
It's a far cry from the kind of typical image promotion or advertisements that we think about with PR firms. These unethical practices, these unethical PR firms, are often most effective at the local level, where powerful corporate interests can overwhelm local communities. Ms. Foster, what was your experience in Colorado facing off against one of these PR firms?
The harassment was extensive. We logged throughout the state and throughout the entire 4 months of our campaign, the extensive harassment and targeting. There was approximately $40 million spent against the campaign in the, I think, 9 total months that we were running the campaign. So yes, they were incredibly sophisticated and widespread. And this was just against, like I said, moms, grassroots campaign people that are doing this in their spare time, that don't have the expertise and sophisticated techniques that these campaigns were implementing against us.
Thank you, Ms. Foster. The groups in Colorado opposing this proposition that you worked on reported spending upwards of $30 million on their campaign. Ms. Arena, to go back to you, is that a typical amount for a PR firm to spend on a state ballot campaign?
That is a very high amount to spend on a state ballot campaign, I would say, $31 million. They outspent the opposition by, I think that would be a factor of over 30 to 1. And, that money obviously went very far for them.
And how did they use the millions of dollars that they received from the oil? How did the PR firm use the millions of dollars it received from the oil and gas industry for this campaign? What were some of the messages that they were trying to promote and give the appearance that they were coming from the community?
Yes, well, I can say that, it's obvious that they tried to flood the zone with just as much media as they possibly could, TV, social posts, direct mail, op-eds, events, and so forth. They obviously did very big, large media buys, I would assume. And the third-party mobilization efforts were quite extensive, so there would be a lot of work done around recruiting those individuals, paying them, managing them, pushing them to, again, echo the talking points of the campaign. Again, a lot of that was undisclosed activity where it wasn't clear who was funding those actors. So those are very expensive campaigns. The messaging was a little bit on the extreme side. I think that Colorado Rising was the ballot initiative was framed as a liberal effort to drive conservatives out of the state of Colorado. So we saw very extreme language used in the scope of the campaign itself.
Thank you very much. The chair will now recognize Ranking Member Moore, the gentleman from Utah, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Let's just simply state what we're talking about today, that it's okay for environmental groups to put spin or narrative and create a storyline that even the Denver Post had to come back and retract and correct misleading statements from a narrative that was getting pushed in Colorado. But it's not okay for American energy companies to tell their story. You cannot have it both ways. And today's hearing is entirely about, not even looking at the misinformation or narratives that we've seen from environmental groups, being an example that hopefully we get a chance to discuss today. I would like to just go through and just a sincere yes or no from each of our witnesses. And I'm going to open it up, not just the Republican witness today, to all of you, just a sincere yes or no. And then I'll move on to some questions that I've prepared. Is natural gas a better energy source for reducing emissions than coal? Does anybody disagree with that statement? Do you agree that natural gas is better and it emits less pollutants than coal? Can we just go down the list of everybody here on the panel today? I can read everybody's name, sorry. I'll grab everybody's names here. There we go. Ms. Arena.
No, methane is one of the top greenhouse
Just a yes or no.
gases.
So you think that
No.
coal is better than natural gas?
No, I don't think coal is better. I think
Well,
natural gas
I'm
is
just asking
slightly
for a
better.
yes or no. Would you rather have it be coal? Because wind can't do it all. We can't cover it all with wind. I wish we could, but we can't. So, Ms. Aronzik.
I'm an expert in communications and media strategies.
A yes or no. Ms. Cook, a yes or no.
Yes.
And Ms. Foster.
I'm sorry, could you just clarify?
Would you prefer to
I
have
was
it? Would you prefer it to be coal or natural gas?
I'm just confused by the question.
Okay,
Could you just
I understand.
clarify?
I get. See, this is what I'm talking about. We can't get to the root of the problem here. I'm just trying. Me as one member of 435 members of Congress, what I'm trying to do is help us avoid what Europe's going through right now. They succumb to a narrative that natural gas was the worst thing in the world, even though it reduces emissions, and then they just buy it from Russia. Then we have a global, catastrophic event going on in Ukraine right now with Russia, the evil empire that they are. So they have to then go away from the energy there, and so they go back to coal, right? And I just want to help us avoid that. And I'm not saying that my party has had this perfect. We haven't. But what we know is we have to have energy. We have to be able to get to and from places. Democrats, Republicans, we all, use energy. And I just want us to help us build a broader, more expansive, strategic plan on how to go about doing this. Otherwise, just constantly demonizing the energy industry. What I've found in my interactions with them, they've been sincere on their efforts to embrace clean technology, reduce emissions. Across the Wasatch Front in Utah, they invested enormous amount of money, overinvested into Tier 3 gasoline. They didn't have to. They weren't forced to do it. They did it because it was the right thing to do. We are all for that, and we've been trying to promote that as much as possible. I get a little excited about this issue, so I apologize. I sincerely was not trying to badger any of the witnesses. I just, when you get two options, I just want to know, what would we rather be doing? I'll go back to Ms. Cook here with about a minute left. In your testimony, you mentioned that energy policy is all about trade-offs. Can you just spend a few more minutes on highlighting that, and then we'll have a chance to jump into some other questioning?
Thanks for the question. Listen, we often think that the trade-off is just emissions. So we'll say we're going to shut down a coal-fired power plant and replace it with wind, solar, batteries, and some natural gas, and therefore we'll have lower emissions. But it's really not that simple. A single working mom sees her electricity bill skyrocket. Her power is shut off. It affects her quality of life. That's a trade-off. Are we willing to do that to our fellow citizens? But there are more trade-offs to consider, and it's everything. It's land use, it's energy efficiency per capita, it's cost, it's grid reliability, it's environmental concerns, mineral extraction, resource development, geopolitical, political, and also just the role of each resource. Coal is a base load resource. Natural gas is an immediate type of resource. Wind and solar are non-dispatchable, available when Mother Nature decides that they are. It is about trade-offs, and that's what we need to be talking about in the energy policy arena. And it also includes how it's going to impact our fellow citizens.
Thank you, Ms. Cook. Yield back.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from New York, Ms. Velasquez, for 5 minutes.
Good morning, and thank you, Madam Chair, for this important hearing. Ms. Aronchik, in your testimony, you draw a parallel between the long-term PR strategies used by the tobacco industry as they try to downplay the health impact of their product in the 1980s and 90s, and the fossil fuel industry's efforts to prevent action on climate change. Can you please briefly explain why these strategies remain highly effective, even across completely different sectors?
Thank you for that question. The long-term strategic nature of public relations strategies, of course, the most obvious answer is that they work. They work to delay responses to environmental problems. They work to delay environmental regulations and legislation. And they often distort or otherwise confuse the message on whether these environmental problems or climate issues are relevant and urgent.
Thank you. And Ms. Aronchik, PR firms are weaponizing information by creating false narratives about the role that the fossil fuel industry plays in contributing to the climate crisis. In your research, what effective strategies, if any, have you come across to combat the spread of disinformation?
Strategies to combat this spread of disinformation?
Yes, please.
You know, this is a tough question because it's very challenging to know when there's constant disinformation circulating, what is real and what is manufactured.
Mm-hmm.
So the onus ends up being on individuals to try to develop strategies to pay attention to certain sources or multiple sources. Most people don't have the kind of background information to be able to parse, especially some of the technical conversations, and to know where the facts are.
Thank you. Ms. Arena, would you like to comment on that question?
Yes, and I would like to put into perspective how common and how widespread a problem this is. According to a survey that was just released last week, 60% of oil super major messaging contains a green claim. 60%. So that's the majority of their public-facing communications containing a green claim. Well, less than 12% of their capital expenditures are actually invested in those green activities. It's even lower for Chevron and Exxon and U.S. gas companies as well. And at the same time, the lobbying activity of these companies is diametrically opposed to the public positions they're taking. So the rhetoric that they aim towards lawmakers is completely different from the rhetoric they project out into the world. So what that does is it creates a mass level of confusion around what it is that these companies are really doing. And that is what we object to. We do not object to the fact that these companies are communicating. We are objecting to how they are communicating and the strategies and tactics that they're using.
Thank you. Ms. Arena, I understand in 2015, you resigned from your position as an executive vice president at Edelman, citing the firm's stance on climate change as the reason. Given your experience, what does holding PR firms like Edelman accountable look like?
Well, I think the first thing that needs to happen is open dialogue. The fact that we are here in a hearing where not a single public relations firm engaged in some of these activities is present, and they have all declined to participate, I think is quite significant. There clearly needs to be a straightforward and open discussion about these issues that are absolutely connected with the climate change problem. We have scientific consensus from the IPCC linking misinformation and corporate brand building and advertising efforts with climate obstruction. So there is consensus around this problem. This is a conversation that the PR world needs to get engaged in, and I help to drive those efforts forward as well.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Heiss.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Arena, let me begin with you. Yes or no, is Generous Ventures a member of the Clean Creatives campaign?
Yes,
Okay, thank you.
sign that pledge.
And were you a founding member of the Clean Creatives campaign? That's correct, isn't it?
I was one of the early members, correct?
Okay. All right. Can you tell me who is behind the funding of Clean Creatives campaign?
Individuals, no, I can't tell you that. I know some of the foundations they've raised money from, but again, I'm not on the management committee over there, just a member.
Okay. Do you know, does Clean Creatives accept foreign money or foreign support while trying to influence American policy?
I could not comment on their finances.
Well, I'm not asking you to comment on their finances. I'm asking you if they accept foreign money.
I don't know if they accept.
Would
foreign
you
money. I
please
believe they
provide a
accept
list of
grants.
the funders that you are aware of to this committee? We would appreciate that. You said you do know some. I'm asking you to provide that to the committee, please. What kind of support does Fossil Free Media and the KR Foundation provide to Clean Creatives?
KR Foundation is a foundation that supports climate accountability work around the world. And so they are a funder of Fossil Free. And as I put in my disclosure form, I also received a grant from KR Foundation.
Okay. Madam Chair, I have a couple of emails here that I'd like to submit for the record. The first is one sent out by Fossil Free Media about a press release regarding the majority's threat to a subpoena to FTI. The other is the actual press release from the majority in that regard.
Without objection.
Thank you very much. The interesting thing with these emails here, the first being sent out by Fossil Free, announcing the majority's threat to subpoena FTI from Clean Creatives. It is stamp marked 5:34 p.m. Eastern Time on August 17th. On the other hand, the official press release from the majority went out on that same day, August 27th or August 17th at 7:28 p.m. So almost 2 hours after the email from Fossil Free. Ms. Arena, do you know how Clean Creatives became aware that the majority was threatening to subpoena FTI?
No, again, I don't work inside Fossil Free Media. I'm a member of their campaign. So I couldn't speak to that.
Do you normally, are you privy to information about future committee actions prior to the implementation or the public announcement of committee work?
If the committee reaches out to us via email, we would be privy to that information, but otherwise, no.
So are you saying the committee reached out to you beforehand about the subpoena?
Yes, I was made aware that it would potentially happen.
It's very concerning to me that an outside advocacy group knew hours before the public knew that the majority was going to threaten to issue a subpoena. It makes me wonder what other information the committee leaks, the majority leaks to third-party outside groups before the public is made aware of this. It's extremely concerning to me and hypocritical that we're even having this hearing today. This is totally bogus, totally hypocritical. Ms. Cook, let me go to you. The Clean Creatives is allowed to engage in free speech, but at the very same time, the public relations firm representing oil and gas industry are under investigation for exercising free speech. Ms. Cook, aren't there some PR firms that attempt to influence voters against oil companies that are funded by some of this dark money? Yes or no?
Yes.
Would you repeat that?
Yes.
Okay. Isn't it hypocritical to you? Incredibly hypocritical to say that one side should have free speech and the other side should not.
Yes.
Thank you very much. I yield back.
The chair will now recognize the gentleman from New York, Mr. Tonko, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for your leadership on such an important issue. Constituents in my district care deeply about advancing renewable energy and creating a cleaner and healthier community for all. And I imagine that the oil and gas industry knows that a great way to combat popular support for building a clean energy future is with disinformation or anti-democratic tactics that prevent communities from doing what they truly believe is best for them. And I'm particularly alarmed by Ms. Foster's experience in Colorado, where the oil and gas PR firms blocked a popular ballot proposition using tactics described by Ms. Foster as nothing short of harassment, stalking, and fraud. And more than anything, I'm alarmed by the committee's findings that this is a pervasive issue. Through PR firms, the fossil fuel industry is strategically misleading members of all of our constituencies to line their own pockets, stymie climate action, and disrupt the democratic process. And they have for decades as our communities suffer deep consequences. So, Ms. Foster, in your testimony, you spoke about the difficulties that Colorado Rising had retaining professional signature gathering firms for your ballot proposition. How common is it to use such a firm, and is it fair to say that a ballot campaign has to use one to have a fair shot?
The requirements in 2018 to make the ballot were collecting over 100,000 signatures from registered Colorado voters, which is an enormous task. And I know of only one other ballot initiative campaign that has ever successfully accomplished that without a professional signature gathering firm. So I would say it's an imperative part of the process.
Thank you. And what happened with your signature gathering firms? Do you believe that you could access one whose work you could trust?
By the end of the signature gathering campaign, we no longer felt that we could trust any campaigns to not be paid off or flip on us. And so we ended up actually taking on the entire signature gathering operation ourselves in the middle of the campaign because we lost 3 firms.
And multiple firms leaving sounds like a pattern. In a recording obtained by the committee, Colorado Rising volunteers asked a signature gatherer why he abruptly stopped working with Colorado Rising. And he said, and I quote, "Oh, nobody threatened me. You know what they're doing. They're going around buying people." Ms. Foster, do you believe the other signature gatherers were also paid off?
The first signature gathering firm said that they had been offered a bribe at the beginning of the campaign, and then the quality of work quickly deteriorated. That gentleman openly stated that he was, and then we had another one leave the campaign earlier than we had previously agreed upon. So I think the possibility is certainly likely.
And in the same recording, the signature gatherer admitted he had been asked to give the signatures he had collected to the opposition group. Ms. Foster, would you characterize this behind-the-scenes interference with your campaign as an open and civil discussion?
No, not at all.
Okay, well, I thank you for your response to my questions. I believe certainly the American public deserves to understand the extent that PR firms help oil and gas companies by manipulating public perception and blocking popular efforts. And with that, I yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Colorado, Ms. Boebert, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Foster, in 2018, Colorado Rising, a far-left environmental group that you helped lead, attempted to pass Proposition 112, an oil and gas setback initiative that would have established a 2,500-foot setback between new oil and gas development that occupied buildings. Were you successful in doing so?
No, we were not. We encountered approximately $40 million opposition campaign in comparison to our about $1 million. So we lost about 4.5%.
Thank you, Ms. Foster. You were not successful in doing so. When put to a public vote, the initiative lost by 10 points. And the reason why is obvious. Natural gas and oil supports hundreds of thousands of jobs in Colorado, approximately 235,000 jobs. And your ultimate goal to impose a fracking ban on our state threatens to destroy our economy and compromise our energy independence. Ms. Foster, your America Last socialist organization has repeatedly attempted to hit the oil and gas industry in Colorado, including through ballot initiatives, while Colorado Democrat governor and Democrat senators from my state promised to support several of the initiatives you put forward. They have since backtracked. Most notably, last year, when the governor indicated he couldn't support Senate Bill 21-200. In a scathing letter to Governor Polis in April 2021, Colorado Rising had this to say, quote, "What's particularly troubling about the governor's attack on SB 200 in his use of oil and gas industry talking points to justify his opposition to the bill," end quote. Given your support for these elected officials and their willingness to peel back numerous aspects of your radical agenda, would it be fair to say that the governor, along with the Democrat senators, betrayed your trust? And are you disappointed in them and for that way?
You know, I'm not entirely sure how this pertains to the topic of PR firms, but the ultimate reality is that Proposition 112 was supported by the Colorado Democratic Party platform. We got over 1 million votes from registered Colorado voters.
And the voters
We
shut it
secured
down.
more-
Would it be fair to say that the governors and the senators misled you into believing that they supported your anti-affordable energy agenda? They've backtracked on this.
I wasn't a part of 200, and that is a separate issue from 112.
Colorado Democrats and myself find ourselves in an interesting position because we do all disagree with your anti-energy agenda, not because Colorado Democrats are seriously interested in promoting affordable energy and Colorado jobs, but because your agenda, if carried to its logical conclusion, would involve the people of Colorado rubbing their hands together to stay warm and in the coming winter months. And with natural gas prices at a 14-year high and getting higher, they just might have to do that. Now, Ms. Cook, it appears to be the case that Democrats frequently design arguments as disinformation or misinformation to convince people that disagreeing with progressives' or orthodoxy is the wrong thing to do. Would you agree with this assessment? And would you say that these kind of Democrat attacks do nothing but chill free speech?
Well, yes, a hearing like this that attacks our right, anyone's right to provide and another side, another voice is going to chill free speech. And make no mistake, it was voters
Right.
that defeated 112.
Yes.
It wasn't anything else. It was voters.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Cook. On June 12th, 2022, the distinguished chairman of this committee led a letter in which he argued that public relations firms for oil and gas companies delay, quote, environmental initiatives. In your view, is that the justification? Is that justification enough to take the extraordinary step of serving a PR firm with a subpoena? And is it appropriate to target PR firms who work with clients Democrats don't like?
No.
Now, while this committee willingly uses taxpayer resources to harass private companies, arguing, of course, that coal, oil, and gas companies are spending tens of millions of dollars to sway public opinion, actually, I want to move on to this. Sorry, I have four seconds. I really just want to know, why isn't the committee issuing subpoenas for PR firms that offer support for the climate change lobby, like the Sierra Club, who has repeatedly assured us that the genocidal Chinese Communist Party, even while they murder millions of people in concentration camps, is actually quite interested in working with the Democrats' climate change agenda?
The gentlelady's time has expired. The chair will now recognize the gentlelady from Massachusetts, Ms. Trahan, for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Chairwoman Porter and Ranking Member Moore, just for allowing me to wave on to this important hearing. I think one thing that's important to note is that we can have free speech and stop the spread of disinformation if we stop with the grandstanding and just get to sensible policy making. Like many of my colleagues, I represent communities in Massachusetts like Lowell and Lawrence that have been harmed by decades of underinvestment in clean energy, and most recently, record-breaking gas prices that big oil corporations leveled to increase their already record-breaking profits. And we're here today because of opaque business practices, both on the part of billion-dollar oil companies and the PR firms they deploy to do their dirty work, but also social media companies, which by collecting troves of personal data on users have created services that can be weaponized to manipulate public discourse. Excuse me. It's important to recognize the relationship between these two industries, which profit from the destruction of our ecosystems. And one example is the ability for companies and the PR firms that they employ to micro-target online advertisements. A study from the markup found Exxon was targeting an ad that said, quote, "Learn how global thermostat is capturing CO2 directly from the air," to users who engage with liberal political content, while users who engage with conservative political content receive a very different ad that states, quote, "The oil and gas industry is the engine that powers America's economy. Help us make sure unnecessary regulations don't slow energy growth." Now, these type of ads are particularly concerning because they're targeted in ways where experts, such as those here today, may not see the misleading statement about economic growth and may not be able to jump in with counter arguments. And it shouldn't take an investigative report to shine a light on this kind of shady behavior. But right now, that's all that we as lawmakers and members of the public have. In February, I introduced legislation to change that. The Digital Services Oversight and Safety Act, or DSOSA for short, is a comprehensive transparency bill that requires companies that host user-generated content to disclose data on digital advertisements, recommendation algorithms, and publish risk mitigation reports. In layman's terms, no longer will companies like Exxon be able to hide behind ad targeting algorithms and secretive social media policies when they try to pit Americans against each other on the climate crisis. And it's for that exact reason that DSOSA is supported by over 15 environmental organizations. So Dr. Aronchek, can you speak to the way large media, social media platforms influence the spread of climate disinformation? How might scholars in media studies and similar fields benefit from having access to detailed ad libraries and similar transparency metrics?
Well, first, I'd like to mention that both when we're talking about digital advertising, we really have a duopoly of power in Facebook and Google. So when we are seeing some of these targeted social media messages, we really see a concentration of power over what we see, when we see it, where we see it, and how often. So if media researchers like myself can have access to understanding these documents, who is targeted, how are these campaigns being manufactured to work towards certain audiences and not others, that can let researchers ask better questions and produce more informed research.
That's exactly right, and those are our watchdogs. I couldn't agree more. Companies, like you said, Facebook and Google, they have teams that purport to fight coordinated, inauthentic behavior that undermines democracy, and we must shift the incentives of social media companies to put more effort into identifying and grinding transparency to these campaigns. Given the profit motives, it will require regulation. So one, I invite my colleagues to co-sponsor the Digital Services Oversight and Safety Act because we can't continue to let opaque business practices and algorithmic targeting of information harm democracy, consumers, and our planet. Thank you so much, Madam Chair. I appreciate you letting me wave on, and I yield back.
Thank you very much. We'll now begin a second round of questions. I'll recognize myself for 5 minutes. Ms. Foster, I want to show the public and the members of this committee some screen captures from a video. Who are these 3 people and what is going on here?
One of the individuals is someone who's gathered signatures for the Proposition 112 campaign, and the other 2 are protesters that are actively following her and encouraging her to stop gathering signatures.
Did the counter protesters say what it would take for them to leave? To stop
They
following
gave
her?
Yes, they said that they would stop following her if she put away her petition and stopped gathering signatures.
So rather than facilitating the signature gatherers' free speech rights, they were trying to hinder and discourage her. Was this an isolated incident or was this a common occurrence?
This was a common occurrence that happened throughout the state of Colorado.
I want to bring to your attention a leaked email from Anadarko, a major oil company that operates in the Colorado area. It says in part, if you see signature collectors for number 97 or number 94, please follow the instructions below to report said canvassers via text. Text canvas to 72345. You will receive a note that says, where did you see a canvasser in your area? Respond with a specific time, date, and location. Ms. Foster, what is Anadarko asking for here?
They're asking their employees to report to this text hotline the location of any of our signature gatherers if they see them out actively collecting signatures.
And what would happen if the signatures were reported?
As reported by Sam Brash in Colorado Public Radio, a group of protesters would be deployed to the location within 10 to 15 minutes, and then they would actively begin to interfere with the signature gathering process.
Do you think Anadarko also paid those men to follow the signature gatherers? And if you do think that, please tell the committee why.
So when Sam Colorado Public Radio followed up with Anadarko regarding this letter and the text hotline, they defaulted to Protect Colorado, which is an AstroTurf group in Colorado, and the finances show that Anadarko has paid a significant amount of money to protect Colorado.
So this group, the so-called Protect Colorado, has very tight ties with the PR firm PacWest. Nearly 80% of Protect Colorado's expenditures from 2016 to 2018 were payments to PacWest. Given the known PR firm tactics mobilizing these third parties, do you think it's likely that PacWest might have hired these men to engage in following the signature gatherer?
I know that our first signature gathering firm specifically mentioned PacWest when they described this type of opposition tactics. And as you stated, there's a significant monetary connection there as well.
The screen captures, I just showed came from a video the committee obtained of two people following a canvasser in a residential neighborhood. In that video, one of the two people, the two gentlemen I believe it is, following the canvasser, told the canvasser that if she wasn't comfortable with them following her, she should, quote, put away your petition, quote. Were those paid followers or the PR firm that hired them to pose as counter-protesters ever held accountable for this kind of intimidation tactic interfering with her speech?
No.
Thank you. With that, I will now recognize Mr. Heiss or his designee for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Very interesting. Actually today, it's just coming out today, this committee, the House Natural Resource Committee staff, is putting out a report. The report is titled "The Role of Public Relations Firms in Preventing Action on Climate Change." This is not even yet on the committee website. But yesterday, Clean Creatives is tweeting about this. They have a copy of it. Not yet even on committees, on the majority's website, not public. Amazing how Clean Creatives got this. We have Clean Creatives yet again collaborating with the majority, getting information before anybody else has that information. getting information about subpoenas before anyone else has it, getting reports before anyone else has it. This is just absolute insanity what's going on here. And the real investigation ought to be taking place about that type of collaboration. But here we are going through, Ms. Arena mentioned the unethical PR practices, things like fake protesters, not knowing who's paying for it, harassing behaviors. This type of stuff that I'm mentioning even now becomes a part of it all with what's going on here. And this whole thing is unethical, what we're watching. Ms. Cook, let me go to you. In your opinion, what would happen if the United States just stopped producing oil and gas like many of these activist groups are clamoring for? What would happen?
It'd be catastrophic. I'll tell you what, you wouldn't have this hearing today. Civilization, the economy as we know it, would certainly collapse, and I don't think you need a computer modeling out 100 years to figure that out. But it's more. Think about this: the last 2 years with COVID, how many single-use syringes were necessary? And those were plastic that you could dispose of. That's fossil fuels. The helmet that your child wears in any sports activity. I had a bike accident a couple of years ago. A fossil fuel-based helmet saved my life. Glasses saved my eyes. It's in everything. They are in everything. And it has been our more efficient, more effective use of fossil fuels, which has actually lowered emissions over the last couple of decades. I mean, we've gotten better with it. It spurs innovation and technology, and that's what allows us to use it more efficiently, more effectively, develop the technology to capture any emissions or go in another direction to nuclear or something like that. But I can't imagine us ever. It would be catastrophic.
It would be
If
catastrophic.
we didn't have.
Thank you for your
Yeah.
answer. It would be catastrophic. And it's amazing to me that as we speak here today, China is in process of making 50 of the largest coal plants in the world with no protections, they obviously are not concerned with climate change. They are not concerned with polluting the world. And obviously, we right here are not concerned with them doing that either. We have the cleanest coal in the world, and we have witnesses here today who can't even determine if they prefer natural gas over coal. Absolutely stunning. Ms. Cook, let me come back to you. I recognize the importance of sharing how the daily lives of Americans are impacted by misguided policies. We want truth. All of us want truth out there. Your testimony described your efforts to provide an outlet for Coloradans to share how anti-fracking measures would affect them. Could you briefly share some of those stories?
Yeah,
We have about 1 minute.
I'll do it real. Raul, a welder, he was the son of migrant workers who worked for ancillary support services for the oil and gas industry. He worked with his two sons. It was all about opportunity, jobs, future growth for him and his family. He was able to, if that had passed, likely his livelihood would have been shut down. There was a volunteer firefighter, a young woman in New Raymer, Colorado. The oil and gas industry provided them all of the latest and greatest equipment so that she could be of service and help save lives in her community.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Madam Chair. I yield back.
The chair will now recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Khanna, for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to Chair Porter and Chair Grijalva for your leadership on this important issue.
Turn it off until he calls on me.
And I appreciate your looking at the misinformation that oil companies have been engaged in. I know Chair Porter, Chair Grijalva, and Chair Grijalva have been working on this issue, and I have been working on it with Chair Maloney. We have a hearing tomorrow to go over a lot of the misinformation that big oil has engaged in since the 1970s, and that they continue to mislead the public about spending money on clean tech initiatives that are not actually taking place. Now, if we could put on the screen one of the ads that Exxon ran, that would be great. I think it's up because it's virtual. And my question, I guess, for our witnesses is, how does an ad like that even get made? And what would you say are the consequences of an ad like this?
I'm sorry, are you calling on one of us specifically?
Yes,
Just all of
Ms.
us.
Arena, you go first.
I can't see what ad you're referring to, but I would say in general, how an ad like that gets made is a client comes to a ad firm or PR firm with a brief. They want to express their commitment to green tech, whether it's carbon capture or whatever it is that they're doing. And the ads get made. The point is that most of these ads, almost all of them, according to a recent study by Grant Brown, contain factual omissions and distortions, as well as climate delay frames, and they are being amplified very aggressively. So again, these corporations are over-indexing their public reputation on efforts that only represent a minimal aspect of their normal business.
And Ms. Arena, would a PR firm push back on an ad that if it had misleading claims, or do they just publish whatever the oil companies want?
Obviously, it differs between from agency to agency. There is a culture inside agencies that where you're a little more resistant to pushing back against the client brief because it means you could lose the business. So there is some pressure to kind of execute on a client's wish. Having said this, there's also responsibility within the agency world to be familiar with the science. The question about coal versus natural gas is an important one, and the questions about trade-offs are important because we need to understand, whoever is marketing natural gas needs to understand the dangers of methane, the fact that methane has 80 times the warming power of CO2. We need basic scientific literacy within agencies, and that literacy is either non-existent or too low, so that gap needs to close.
Ms. Arena, one of the things that the Chair Porter and her committee discovered is that there's this website with 30 million hits, which says that Exxon is committing to developing safe and reliable energy and mitigating the climate crisis. Is Exxon doing that, and was it responsible for the PR firm to be publishing such a bold claim?
Well, Exxon, I think about 8% of Exxon's capital expenditures are devoted to clean energy, and it is certainly making a massive effort to over-index its public reputation on that small 8%. It is really a fossil fuel company. Oil and gas production continues to be its main focus. So I do think that this over-indexing is unethical and it needs to be policed.
And how would you police it? I mean, I didn't even know it was 8%. I know they, so that is even more than I expected. But I mean, your words, you say it's unethical, and you say that it needs to be policed. I guess my last question would be, how should we do that here in Congress? Our committee on oversight is working closely with Chair Porter, Chair Grijalva. How can we collectively police this over-indexing?
From a perspective of over-indexing, I think disclosures, rules around disclosure is what needs to happen. Most of these ads, they don't contain blatant lies. They contain a blend of factual omissions and distortions. So it's incumbent upon agencies to be familiar with climate delay frames, how greenwashing works, to be able to evaluate it, and from a perspective of lawmakers, to force those disclosures, especially around the third-party mobilization efforts where you have these astroturf groups, different third parties, proxies, where the fact that they are paid proxies is not revealed. And again, these companies are engaging in policy matters. They're not using these practices to sell products. They are using these practices to engage in policy matters. And I think that's what makes this issue even more pointed.
The gentleman's time has expired. The chair will now recognize the gentleman from Montana, Mr. Rosendale, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Cook, I have a couple of very big picture principles and concepts to go over with you. If you could answer a few questions for me. Can you walk us through the relationship between the grid reliability and the energy transition?
Well, I would say currently it's not really a transition. I'm worried we're actually going over a cliff. If we switch to predominantly undispatchable, non-dispatchable, unreliable resources and put them on a grid, providing, this is going to sound kind of geeky and but poor quality, too much power at one time, not enough at another. The grid has to have balance. It has to be electricity has to be used immediately, and it has to always be in balance. When you have sources like wind and solar, and I'm not saying there's not a place for them, I'm just saying when you have sources like wind and solar that aren't reliable in the sense of they're either spiky or they have times of the day when they aren't working, it makes the grid more fragile. It is less resilient. It is unstable. And you will see things like blackouts, brownouts, or in some cases, a complete failure. Baseload power is baseload for a reason. And when you look at capacity factors, we need to be investing in things that can provide stable, reliable, clean, abundant, affordable power when we need it.
Thank you, Ms. Cook. And I will tell you that I experienced the blackouts in February of 2020 at a time when the weather conditions in Montana were about 20 below zero, and the folks in Texas were experiencing the same types of issues, and we witnessed the near collapse of the entire power grid, which brings me to my next question. Do you agree the grid reliability and energy security are valid public policy concerns?
Absolutely, 100%. Some of the single most important public policy concerns.
Thank you very much. And would you respond to accusations that discussing grid reliability, energy security, and climate goals together constitute greenwashing or disinformation?
Listen, I don't think any time you hear another voice, whether, even if you disagree with it, it's not disinformation. It is simply somebody in the public arena having a debate. I get it. You don't like those people. I get it. But that doesn't mean we don't have valid concerns. And I'll tell you what, if you want to see devastating consequences for the environment, see a grid collapse. See what that looks like when people are then burning whatever they can get their hands on to heat their homes or to cook food. It's not disinformation just because you don't agree with it. It is another perspective that deserves to be heard and frankly must be heard. And by the way, that's how we come to the best solutions. I trust Americans, I trust voters, I trust legislators to look at all sides and do the right thing. Public policy organizations like mine, all we do is provide you the information. What you do with it is up to you, but we provide you the information so you can make sound public policy decisions. And that means hearing my perspective on energy security and grid stability.
Thank you. And Ms. Cook, it's been demonstrated factually that the world's going to need oil and gas products for decades to come, not only for energy, but because of all the byproducts that are also generated by each and every one of these. Could you describe the benefits of having oil and gas produced here in the United States with our high the highest environmental standards and labor standards rather than imported countries like Russia, Iran, and Venezuela.
Yeah, that's where I lived in Colorado, Weld County, Colorado, which was one of the highest oil and gas producing counties in the country. 25,000 wells, and I might be wrong on that, but 95% of them are hydraulically fractured, improving air quality every single day because of these strict environmental standards that not just the United States, but the state of Colorado put on oil and gas producers. Hydraulic fracturing alone, the ability to horizontally and then to vertically and then horizontally and directionally drill was absolutely revolutionary in efficiency and emissions reduction.
Thank you. And Madam Chair, I see that my time has expired. So Ms. Cook, thank you so much for your participation. I yield back.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the chair of the full committee on House Natural Resources, the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Grijalva.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the hearing and the diligence and hard work by yourself and the committee staff. It's much appreciated. And, the discussion today is not about ending gas and energy access for the American people, but to expose and seek truth in advertising from the gaslighting that big oil and big gas are doing on the American people through public relations, not just firms, but specific strategies to keep the discussion from being on common ground. And that common ground to me is fact, it's science, and it is empirical information that people can deal with. And that's, I think it's important to do that because this is not just about promoting the benefits of a particular company, but it is about turning the discourse into something other than empirical, fact-based, science-based discussions about what is going on and how this is affecting the overall issue of climate in this country and around the world. But Dr. Aronachik, why do gas and oil companies need PR firms? What are the reasons these companies can't just do the climate information, disinformation work on themselves, by themselves? Why can't a Chevron just be the Chevron company sends out whatever information or disinformation they're sending out? Why do they need a third party, a PR firm?
There's a longstanding pattern of oil and gas companies hiding behind their PR representatives for a variety of reasons. When it comes to some of these really underhanded tactics we've been hearing about today, it's a desire to distance themselves from the dirty work that's being done, not to have their reputation tarnished. But also we can see the need to be protected against general reputational risk. These days, it's very clear that climate change is a real and present danger, and companies don't want to be associated with anti-environmental action. So they use public relations firms. I think one of the most important reasons is that PR firms are experts in the business when it comes to long-term planning and strategy to promote industry viewpoints and to delegitimize advocates and advocacy for environmental action and climate change action. PR firms are able to coordinate across industry sectors so they can work with oil, gas, chemicals, pesticides, mining, because they have clients in all of those sectors. So that kind of expertise is what fossil fuel companies rely on when they work with public relations firms.
Thank you very much. And Ms. Foster, yourself and members of Colorado Rise motivated to start a campaign for increased fracking buffer zones, and you kept that going when the opposition was clearly very strong. what toll did it take on you personally?
Yes, was extremely personally detrimental to me. My health suffered greatly. I began to experience panic attacks, insomnia, all as a result of being in a hypervigilant state for extended amounts of time. It was an incredible amount of stress that had long-term impacts on my health and others in the campaign as well.
And why, and some of the tactics that were used in opposition to your campaign and the campaign that came from the people in Colorado, what oil company using PR firms in a campaign as straight up as that? Why continue to use outside firms in opposition and pay them to do so?
When we first contracted with the firm, we realized that that was a critical piece of the equation to obtaining the signatures we needed to make the ballot. It's an difficult process and very
Indeed.
expensive. And once we started to have concerns about the loyalty and the commitment of the firm, we were already deep into the campaign. Many other firms were already contracted out, and we didn't feel that we had the time to pivot and start the entire operation over again.
Thank you. I yield back, and thank you very much again, Madam Chair.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Mr. Graves. Are you able to question? You're up. Mr. Graves, the gentleman from Louisiana, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I'm excited about this hearing because we're talking about misrepresenting the truth in this hearing today. We're talking about misrepresenting the truth to the American people. We're talking about effectively lying to people. That's what this hearing is about today. And so we have listened over the last 18 months as we have heard people say that we are aggressively carrying out this new energy agenda for the purpose of addressing climate change and reducing emissions. But the reality is that what's happened is we've actually seen emissions go up, not down. Let me say that again. Under this administration's policies designed to address climate change, we've watched emissions go up, not down at the same time. At the same time, we're in a situation now to where 1/4 of all Americans, 1/4 of all Americans in this country are in a situation where they have to decide if they're going to cover groceries, if they're going to cover healthcare costs, or if they're going to pay their utility bills. We're seeing record inflation, and it's a result of what's happening. This right here, respondents who forwent necessary expenses such as medicine or food in order to pay an energy bill. So they're giving up medicine or food in order to pay energy bills. This is the outcome of the Biden administration policies on the American people. It's unaffordable. I mean, looking at some of these percentages, again, in Texas, 34% of the respondents have said that they can't afford, that they've had to forego food or grocery costs in order to pay their utility bills. Look, so folks are saying, oh, well, wait a minute, the Biden administration is doing a great job with energy. You actually have to go back to the 1940s, to find an administration that has leased fewer acres of land for energy production. The 1940s. Take a look at this. I'd take JFK, I'd take Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter, during the first 19 months of his administration, leased 100 times more acres of land for oil and gas production than we've seen under the Biden administration. Ronald Reagan, the big line up there, 375 times more energy. So folks can be sitting there saying, well, wait a minute, I'm worried about emissions. Let me say it again. This administration's energy policies not only have made it unaffordable to cover groceries or medicine, where 25% of all Americans, 1 in every 4 Americans, have had to decide, am I going to pay my utility bill, buy food, or pay for medicine? But they've also resulted in energy emissions going up, not down. And when I say up, let's be clear, up from a Trump baseline. Under the Trump administration, the emissions went down an average of 25% a year. What objective are we achieving? If we're talking about misleading the American people, let's be clear on who it is that's misleading the American people. It's the Biden administration. The Biden administration is misleading the American people, acting as though their energy strategies are resulting in lower emissions and addressing climate change. It's not, and it's pushing emissions to other countries that are going up globally as well. Who can look at this and think that this makes sense? I'm glad we're talking about people that are dishonest, because we need to spend more time. Data doesn't lie, and the facts show that this administration's energy policies are pushing people into poverty, are pushing jobs overseas, and are making energy unaffordable. But wait, it's not just limited to families. We had our sheriff from Terrebonne Parish, Sheriff Saunier. I asked him, so if you weren't spending these dollars on fuel and higher electricity and utility costs, these are dollars that would be going into additional officers' equipment and training. Sheriff Saunier says that's exactly right. He's confirming that what's happened is that as a result of the Biden administration's energy policies, his sheriff's department is spending more money on those things, which is undermining his ability to actually fight crime and do the things that he's supposed to be doing. So I can't say it enough. I'm glad we're talking about misleading the American people, because we have the chief misleader who's out there telling the American people that these policies are working, and they're not. Yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Gomert, for 5 minutes.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate, was thinking, people ask, it just seems like Democrats and Republicans aren't friends with each other. Let me tell you, I was friends, it was an honor to be friend with a former member named John Dingell. And it wasn't because we had a lot of politics in common. He was a very honest man, and I understood he cared deeply about people and people that needed a hand up. And that's why it was such a shame when he was chairman of Energy and Commerce, and he was excited about doing something like Obamacare. He'd been pushing for it for decades. We disagree on that. But he refused to push through the cap and trade bill because, as he famously said, that got him fired as chairman by Speaker Pelosi, he said that I'm not bringing it through my committee because that bill is not only a tax, it's a great big tax. And he knew it didn't really affect the wealthy. It was inconvenient for them to pay a little more. But who it really crushed was the poor and the lower middle class. And that is what's happening in America. As this administration, as my friend Graves had pointed out, we're not leasing as much. We're cutting back on the energy resources with which this country has been blessed. And those of us that have grown up around drilling don't mind it. As my predecessor was a Democrat at the time, Ralph Hall, said, look, I don't mind drilling anywhere in the world except on my grave, and I'm okay if you slant hole under my grave. Because he knew how much it lowered the price of energy and helped people that didn't have. But I'm particularly concerned about the efforts of the majority party here. It seems an effort at intimidation because the firm is advertising and trying to point out the good. And it is helpful to people to be able to pay less for energy. And it would be helpful if people weren't misled about electric cars. They are generally more expensive. We're going to have so much lithium batteries that we won't know what to do with it. It's going to be a huge problem. We're having to buy so much from China with regard to rare earth metals. But you can't make a vehicle without some fossil fuels. And then you've got the problem of people, if you want to plug in your car, as Thomas Massey pointed out, to charge it, it's the equivalent of plugging in 17 refrigerators. If everybody just has one car, we're going to have blackouts, brownouts all over the country. That's not good for people that barely are getting by. And let me just point out, when this committee, the majority of this committee starts thinking about trying to intimidate people into not bragging about the benefits of their products, Enright said, when you see that in order to produce, you need to obtain permission from men who produce nothing, when you see that money is flowing to those who deal not in goods but in favors, when you see that people get richer by graft and by pull than by work, and your laws don't protect you against them but protect them against you, when you see corruption being rewarded and honesty becoming a self-sacrifice, you may know that your society is doomed. And Natan Sharansky was in prison in Gulag in Russia for speaking up. He makes similar related comments. And so it concerns me greatly for the future of America, and especially for the poor, for the lower middle class that are going to be so harmed by this administration's energy policy. We need to back up and not try to intimidate witnesses. I yield back.
Thank you very much. With that, with no further members waiting to question, we'll begin to wrap up. I'll offer my closing statement. Today, we have heard about the ways that PR firms are paid to engage in unethical tactics that intimidate and silence Americans who are exercising their rights to support actions that combat climate change. I'm looking forward to hearing more tomorrow at the hearing about oil company profits and climate disinformation that's being held by my colleague, Chairwoman Carolyn Maloney, in the Committee on Oversight and Reform. But for all that we have seen here today, I know there is more, and it's worse. We initiated the subpoena process for FTI Consulting, which has one of the worst reputations in the business. Though negotiations are ongoing, the trajectory is sadly not good. What are they trying to hide? Is it their creation of fake grassroots groups for their clients to hide behind? Was it the creation of fake social media profiles to track the plans of activist groups? Or is there something worse? The harder FTI Consulting fights, the more it appears that they have a lot to lose by having their tactics exposed through oversight. We are just getting started. I want to close by thanking my colleague, Mr. Heiss, my Republican colleague, Mr. Heiss, for identifying the report, the role of public relations firms in preventing action on climate change that the committee has released. And I encourage people who are interested in this topic to review the report, and in particular, the documentary evidence of tactics and unethical tactics and climate disinformation that make up the bulk of the report. With that, I will recognize the ranking member for any closing statement he may wish to make.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll just keep my comments brief. I think it's important for the American public to hear what's going on in this committee hearing today. What this is yet another attempt to silence the viewpoints from one side of the aisle from being brought forward. Firms that promote different products and entities have been around since our country was first created. And we all on a regular basis hear about the newest product, about the greatest product, about the new inventions that are coming forth. And that is throughout all industries. And I don't think that the oil and gas industry is any different. And I think that when we start trying to utilize this body to silence one side of a discussion or another side of the discussion, what we do is suppress the very innovation and technology that has brought us to this place in history, that's given us the ability to utilize so many of our resources, to be able to develop them in a more environmentally sound method, to be able to make sure that our labor standards are the highest in and greatest in the world. And by trying to keep some side of the discussion suppressed or intimidate them from bringing their message forward, I think is always a bad idea. That more information is better for all of us. So I do appreciate the hearing, and I would yield back. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I want to thank the witnesses for their valuable testimony and the members for their participation and questions. The members of this committee may have some additional questions for witnesses, and we'll ask that you respond to those in writing. Under Committee Rule 3.0, members of the committee must submit witness questions within 3 business days following the hearing, and the hearing record will be held open for 10 business days for these responses. If there is no further business, without objection, the subcommittee stands adjourned.